A woman in London walked into a bank and handed the teller her life savings, £50,000, to donate to charity. She had never been particularly generous before. In fact, her family described her as selfish, but a tumor was eating through her frontal lobe, destroying the neural circuits that create self-interest. Frontotemporal dementia had turned her into a saint. And she wasn't alone. Dr. Catherine Rankin first noticed the pattern at UC San Francisco in 2009. Patients with frontotemporal dementia were becoming extraordinarily kind as their condition progressed. One man began volunteering at homeless shelters every day, something he'd never done in his 60-year life. Another woman started leaving cash tips for grocery store workers who weren't allowed to accept them. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a disease that makes you incapable of selfishness. The frontal lobe controls impulse suppression, social boundaries, and, most importantly, self-preservation instincts. When it deteriorates, the careful balance between selfishness and altruism collapses. Patients lose the ability to prioritize their own needs over those of complete strangers. Dr. Rankin's team tested this using economic games where participants could choose to share money. Healthy participants kept about 60% for themselves. FTD patients gave away nearly everything. They literally could not compute self-interest anymore. Margaret, a retired teacher from Ohio, exemplified this transformation. Before her diagnosis, she was described by her children as tight with money and stubborn. As the disease progressed, she began giving away her possessions to neighbors and strangers. She donated her car to a teenage grocery bagger who mentioned needing transportation. Her family tried to intervene, but Margaret couldn't understand why they were upset. The neural pathways that once whispered, "What about me?" had gone completely silent. Brain imaging revealed massive atrophy in the right frontopolar cortex, the seat of selfish decision-making. Without this region functioning, patients become trapped in a state of pure empathy. They feel others' pain as intensely as their own, sometimes more intensely. One patient emptied his retirement account to help a stranger avoid foreclosure. Another spent her final months cooking meals for every homeless person in her neighborhood. They were dying from kindness, literally unable to care for themselves. This raises a disturbing question about human nature itself. If removing selfishness makes us kinder, what does that say about the healthy brain? Evolution wired us for survival, which requires a certain amount of selfishness. The frontal lobe acts as a gatekeeper, deciding when to help and when to protect yourself. FTD patients lose this gatekeeper entirely, becoming defenseless against exploitation. Dr. Rankin documented patients being scammed repeatedly because they couldn't recognize malicious intent. One woman was defrauded 7 times in a single month by the same phone scammer. She genuinely believed each call was from a different charity in need. The disease reveals a fundamental truth. Kindness requires cognitive machinery. Pure empathy without judgment is not virtue. It's vulnerability. Normal brains constantly calculate the cost-benefit of helping others. We have neural circuits specifically designed to be strategically selfish. FTD destroys these circuits, leaving only the impulse to give without boundaries. The ventromediate prefrontal cortex normally inhibits altruistic impulses when they threaten survival. In healthy individuals, this creates what researchers call bounded generosity. We help others, but not at the expense of our own basic needs. FTD patients lose these boundaries completely, entering a state of pathological altruism. They become incapable of the healthy selfishness that keeps us alive. Neuroscientist Dr. Antonio Damasio studied similar cases for decades. He found that damage to specific prefrontal regions creates acquired sociopathy, but in reverse. Instead of becoming antisocial, patients become hyper-altruistic to their own detriment. One patient gave away his medication to other hospital patients who looked sicker. Another sold his house for half its value because the buyer seemed really sad about their finances. These aren't heartwarming stories of human goodness. They're symptoms of brain damage. The patients' families often struggle with this distinction. How do you mourn someone becoming too kind to live? But here's what haunts researchers most about frontotemporal dementia. It suggests that our normal capacity for selfishness isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Evolution didn't wire us to be maximally kind because maximal kindness is fatal. The healthy brain is a careful balance between empathy and self-preservation. FTD patients show us what happens when that balance breaks. They become saints in a world designed for sinners. Dr. Rankin's latest research reveals an even more disturbing pattern. As FTD progresses, patients don't just become kind, they become gullible to the point of danger. They lose the ability to detect deception, manipulation, or ill intent. One patient invited a known scammer into her home and made him dinner. Another gave his social security number to anyone who asked, believing they all had good reasons. The disease doesn't just make you kind, it makes you incapable of protecting yourself from cruelty. This creates a paradox that challenges our understanding of human goodness. Is kindness only virtuous when it's chosen rather than compelled by brain damage? Are we only moral when we have the capacity to be immoral? FTD strips away the very thing that makes kindness meaningful, the choice to be otherwise. These patients aren't heroes. They're victims of a disease that stole their ability to be selfish. Their kindness comes not from moral strength, but from neurological weakness. And yet, the world they create around them is undeniably beautiful. Homeless shelters report that FTD volunteers are the most dedicated they've ever seen. Charities describe them as angels who give until they literally have nothing left. But this beauty is built on a foundation of cognitive destruction. The very thing that makes them so giving is killing them. As their frontal lobes deteriorate, they lose the ability to feed themselves. They forget to pay their own bills while donating to every charity that calls. They die in poverty, having given away everything they needed to survive. The disease forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about human nature. Our capacity for cruelty and our capacity for survival are neurologically linked. The same neural machinery that lets us be selfish also lets us protect ourselves. FTD patients lose both abilities simultaneously. They become too kind for this world, and this world consumes them. Dr. Rankin now studies these patients, knowing she's watching people die from goodness itself. Each act of generosity is a symptom of brain death, not moral triumph. The families watch their loved ones become saints while losing their minds. And in the end, we're left with a question that has no comfortable answer. If removing our capacity for selfishness makes us this kind, what does that say about who we really are when our brains are intact? Perhaps the most human thing about us isn't our capacity for good or evil, it's our ability to choose between them. And frontotemporal dementia takes that choice away, leaving only the kindness we're too afraid to freely give.